Hello, welcome to the live video today. We're going to be discussing about what something Uhuru said. He talked about he appointed Moody Awori to a certain board. It's the Sports, Arts and Development Board, right? And Moody is 90 years old, very old fella, born in 1928. Anyway, so Uhuru defended himself by saying that it was the youth are stealing a lot of money, so he wants it to give that cash. He wants to give the fund to Moody Awori to manage because he's old, and theory is that he won't steal. Now, never mind the fact that Moody Awori was involved in some Anglo-licit scandals back in the day. Let's just put that aside, and all of these permanent secretaries who will be part of the board are, trying to handle some scandals on their own. Let's put that aside. Let's talk about the causes of underdevelopment in Africa, because many people say that Africa is underdeveloped because we are too young. The United States is 200 years old. The British Empire is thousands, I think, let's say thousands of years old, or hundreds of years old. I think that's more accurate. And the Empire of Japan, it's around 2,000 years old or something. So as in, perhaps we're too young, and that's why we are underdeveloped, right? Perhaps the youth are too inexperienced, and that's why they steal so much, even if there is no evidence to prove that the young steal more than the old. So anyway, just to discuss this stuff, I wanted to give some overview from researchers, what they talk about it, what they say about it. And let's start with somebody from the UK, our former colonizers, the University of Sussex. His name is Sambit Bhattacharya. He's the son of an Indian immigrant. He's living in the UK. So anyway, Sambit gives a number of reasons why Africa is underdeveloped. One of them is slave trade, the other one is colonization, and the other one is the fallout of malaria. So he compares these three, and he says that malaria is the biggest cause of underdevelopment in Africa. He says that malaria causes deaths, and when people die, you can't develop very well, and that malaria needs to affect savings negatively because there are no people to save because they're dying. And another reason is that because people would use their money on malaria as opposed to other kinds of stuff. So you might think that this theory is far-fetched. It's out of the ballpark completely, but it's not. Malaria is the number one killer of mankind ever. All the wars combined since we began in history, they do not even come close to the number of people that malaria killed over this same period. So it's a really big killer, and it has a really big impact on human society, especially in terms of population, right? Because it has really kept our population low in terms of Africa, and it's continuing to do that. Why? 584,000 people die every year from malaria. That's the world over. More than 500,000 people the world over die from malaria. 90% of those people are in Africa. So when you think in terms of economics, this is 584,000, right? People who could have bought goods, who could have provided employment, and they're dying every year. And before they die, we actually use money to try and save them, and we could have used that money in development, right? So that's what this guy is trying to say. I find that his theory is not reliable. It's not valid, because we can find instances where deaths caused a lot of suffering, especially in Europe. 30% of the European population was wiped out by the Black Plague, right? There's the Spanish flu soon after. As the World War I was ending, as the Great War was ending, there was the Spanish flu, and it killed many people. I think it was 18 million people or something in Europe, and they still recovered from it. They're recovering from one of the worst wars in human history, and then they face one of the worst diseases in human history, and they still recover. But Africa cannot recover from malaria, and it's not killing, let's say, like 1 million people a year. It's killing around 490,000 people per year in Africa, and that's the entire continent of around 1.2 billion people, and we can't recover from that. How many people are dying from wars? Anyway, I do not find this theory to be plausible, because I have seen instances where people have recovered from diseases like in Europe, like the Black Plague, and they still grew economically, and they became powerful, and they actually came and conquered us. So I don't buy that theory, but I'm hoping that it's giving you an idea of the possible causes of underdevelopment in Africa. First one, slave trade. Another one, colonization. Another one, disease. In this case, he gives malaria. So let's go to another person. Let's go to the States right now. Let's actually go to California. And here we'd find John Jacques Louis. He did a paper for the Naval Postgraduate School Mountaineering. So, and what he did is that he differentiated between two kinds of economies, the traditional economy and the modern economy. And he says that one of the reasons why Africa is not developing is because it's not moving from the traditional economy to the modern economy. That's one of the reasons why you're not developing. And let me give you an example. Like in the 1960s, we had the matatus that were developing, right, in Kenya. They were developing informally. And then we had the buses which had been there formally for a long period of time. And the buses were foreign owned. They were owned by the British. And so what happened is that Kenya, instead of focusing on this informal sector that's developing, that's actually a response to the inadequacies of this formal sector, the buses, it ignored them, and then it focused on this foreign-owned formal sector, which are the buses. And what happened is that the matatus, they went for a bit of time without anybody, building structures that would sustain them and grow them and formalize them. And that's why we have a matatus crisis in Kenya still today. Again, the answer for for inefficiencies in the formal system, but we are ignoring them because we like focusing on the formal system, right? Because anyway, just an example, 75% of the Nigerian economy is informal, right? Which I think is around the same percentage in Kenya. Of the employment in Nigeria is provided by the informal sector, and I think it's around the same figure within Kenya. So a lot of employment is being provided by the informal sector, yet we're not focusing on it. We're not trying to formalize it, and this is what John Jacques is saying, right? And here's the reason that he's given for failing to formalize this sector. He's saying that the capitalistic system is informal and that we are rejecting that capitalistic system, and he is very wrong. We are not rejecting that capitalistic system. The matatu industry in Kenya is heavily capitalistic. These guys went, they took loans for those matatus, they brought those matatus to the road, and those matatus are serving a particular interest, right? And they're not forcing people to take those matatus. People are actually paying for those matatus, right? So it's a highly capitalistic system, and we are embracing it. The problem is that the people at the top, they're pursuing what we call socialist policies, where the government decides on what it will focus on. It's not the need that drives government decisions. It's some elitist person who's up there who's deciding to focus on certain formal systems, failing to realize that this formal system have inefficiencies, and that's actually the reason why the informal sector drives up. And when it moves up, we just ignore them as if they're not there. So that's a problem. So John Jacques he's moving in the right direction, such that he develops a distinction between the formal and informal economies, right? But his reason for not moving from informal to formal is not valid, right? It's not true, because you'd find that the informal economies are actually an embracing of capitalistic ideas, and capitalism is not foreign. We had capitalism from back in the day, right? So anyway, just to move to another researcher, let's stay back in the States a bit. This one is from Tennessee, and what he says is that he gives triple causes of underdevelopment in Africa. The first one, colonial capitalism, state terrorism, and racism, right? So state terror, okay, colonial capitalism, I think, which I would explain with terrorism, it's the same. Again, when the colonialists came, they did not pursue capitalism. What they pursued was a socialist kind of idea, where the state takes over, the state decides what production will do, and where you'll move, where you'll stay, and all of those things. It was not capitalism, because capitalism, what it decides is that the market decides. If you want to produce, the market decides. If you want to live here, the market decides. So that's capitalism in its sense. These are liberal ideas from America. They hate capitalism, so they need sort of like an excuse to hate on it, but it's never valid because capitalism works. State terrorism, it's true. where the state comes to your place and says that you will develop this. The state comes to your place and it takes your land. So that's true. In terms of racism, this is an American idea that's brought here. Perhaps we might say tribalism, if we put that. And yeah, so anyway, he says that we terrorized, exterminated and abused the Europeans terrorized, exterminated and abused Africans, which is true. Again, it does not explain why we are underdeveloped, and I'll explain that as we go. Again, I need to emphasize, whatever the British did to Africa does not explain why we are underdeveloped. I'll explain that as we go. So anyway, he says that because of what the Europeans did, they established the building blocks for underdevelopment. Again, I think we had tackled this before. When the British came, they left their collaborators here. The British came, actually they corrupted these collaborators by giving them gifts in exchange for sovereignty. And when they left these collaborators in power, the collaborators continued with that kind of mentality where they have to receive gifts for them to give government services. And that's how corruption, continued. Again, I'll continue and say that this is not the primary cause of why we are undeveloped, but that's as we go on. So here's an African, finally, not a researcher, but still an African. I couldn't find researchers. Something we need to look at. So the African says that his name is Geoffrey Nalianya, and he says that lack of official ideology is a problem, political uncertainty is a problem, illiteracy is a problem, centralization is a problem, and colonial legacies are a problem. So colonial legacies, I think we've dealt with that. Centralization is a problem, of course, because the top makes decisions for you instead of the bottom making decisions for you. Colonization is an excellent example of that. And then when you look forward, socialism is an excellent example of that, where the state decides what you guys will produce and what you guys will do, and everything of that sort. So that's something else. High levels of illiteracy, so that is not a reason for underdevelopment, because people have brains. Yeah, you don't have to know to read and write to see that this works and this does not work. Again, we saw yesterday that the people who went to university, they get jobs. The people who went to secondary school, they move to agriculture. The people who only cleared at primary level, they move into business. They do not stay idle. So illiteracy is not a reason why people stay idle. People always try to move forward. Political uncertainty, it's true, you cannot invest in a country where there is uncertainty. You don't know whether your business will be there tomorrow or somebody else will come and take it forcefully, right? Foreign direct investments would be low if that happens. So yeah, that's true. A lack of official ideology is I think a very, very, very good reason why we are underdeveloped, because ideology, people mobilize, they move their resources together when they have a particular ideology driving them forward. Like in the East, like when there was communism and all of those things, they pulled all their resources together in an effort to push towards growth through socialism, and in Russia it was through communism. They failed because socialism does not work. Venezuelans are eating dogs right now because socialism does not work. Africa is poor right now because we pursue mostly socialist policies instead of capitalistic policies. But it gives an idea of what ideology can do. It can move you all together towards a certain ideology, a certain goal. Again, we say that the problem with Africans is that we focus on the African political system, is that we focus on distribution of political posts instead of mobilizing our resources. So ideology can actually help us mobilize. Now what we need is the right kind of ideology to help us mobilize, and we'll discuss that as we go. So anyway, so this guy is right. I think Geoffrey, he's moving forward, right? The only thing that he failed to do was to give us the right kind of ideology, and he put illiteracy there as a reason for why we are underdeveloped. It's not a reason for why we are underdeveloped. So anyway, so at least we've covered that. There's nobody talking about age as the reason for underdevelopment in Africa. There's nobody saying that Africa is too young. There's nobody saying that. They're talking about colonization. They're talking about which is the other one? They're talking about centralization as a problem. They're talking about those kind of things. The two kind of economies, the traditional and the traditional economy and the modern economy, they're talking about malaria. Some are talking about, nobody is talking about age, nobody is talking about the kind of excuses that we give ourselves for being underdeveloped. So anyway, let's go to age now. Let's focus on age now. In 1960, we and Korea were at the same place. Korea was slightly ahead because it had the per capita income was $158. The Kenyan per capita income was $97, so it was slightly ahead. Again, we were not the same, it was slightly ahead. So Kenya we moved from a per capita income of $97, we went to $1,000 and $1,500 in 2017. So that's nice. Isn't that nice? Right? That is very nice. We moved from $97 in 1960 to $1,500 in 2017. And South Korea was at $158. Guess what it moved to? It moved from $158 to $29,000. $29,000. So they increased their wealth by around 20 times. 20 times, right? Kenya, we're barely increasing it by I think we increased it by a low number of times. I think by 15 times only. So you can get from that idea that Kenya, we didn't move fast. Actually, here are the stats. South Korea increased their wealth by 188 times. Kenya increased its wealth by 15 times only. So that's a problem. And it's not about age, because we are relatively the same place, but we moved further. Somebody could say that the level of underdevelopment that happened in South Korea was not as high as it did in Kenya. Like what the British did in Kenya was, they might say that it was insane, that it was too much, but that does not hold. The Japanese ruled South Korea from 1910 to 1945, and this is what they did. They took close to 500,000 Korean men into Japan to work there involuntary. How many of our men were taken into Britain to work involuntary? How many were taken there to work involuntary, right? And that's just in recent times. Colonization. They took around 500,000 women to work in the brothels for Japanese soldiers. The women would attend to around 29 to 40 men per day. That's one woman, 29 men to 40 men per day. The comfort women. It's still a big problem today. Actually, when I think California or something, there's a city in California that built a monument for those comfort women to recognize their plight. Japan was livid. It was angry that they would recognize what they did to that California would recognize what Japan did to their women. So in Kenya, we do not have 500,000 women who were sent as comfort women to British soldiers. We don't have that, right? So I do not believe that we were as brutalized as the South Koreans were, but they were able to emerge. Now here's another thing. People might say that colonization was bad and that we suffered under it, and we did. Like the atrocities under colonizations, they were very bad, right? I don't think nearly as bad as what the Japanese did to South Koreans, but they were bad. What does not kill you makes you stronger. The South Koreans emerged stronger. Under Hitler, the Jews suffered a lot, but they emerged stronger. The Americans, they were colonized by the British, they emerged stronger. Why is it that Africans do not emerge stronger? What is this that is peculiar with so Africans that after they suffer so much, they do not emerge stronger? Because we have been suffering for the longest time. I think the British came around here from the 16th century. They were here by the 19th century. Some were here even the 20th century. Why do we not learn? Because we develop excuses for underdevelopment. Age is not an excuse for underdevelopment. The youth are not inexperienced. When you choose youth who have skewed values, they will steal. So you need to choose youth that have the right kind of values, right? So I'm hoping that you are getting an idea of this. I'm on the last point. The wrong direction. If you are on the wrong direction, it does not matter how long you will take, right? You will still be where you will still, if you if you're on the wrong direction, you'll always move in that wrong direction, and you'll never get to where you're supposed to be. And Africa is on the wrong direction. So this idea of saying that age is the reason why we are underdeveloped, it does not hold water. Because South Korea, we were at the same place, but they went in the right direction, and that's why they multiplied their wealth by 188 times, while we only multiply our wealth by 15 times only, because they moved in the right direction. It's not a matter of age; it's a matter of direction, right? And what Uhuru is saying, that the youth steal, it's not that the youth steal, because even the people who are on that board, they have scandals to handle. Like the PS of health, he has a 5 billion scandal under him. The PS in the sports ministry has 1.7 billion scandal under him. They all, Moody Awori himself, there was still that Anglo leasing scandal under him, and that was billions and billions. So it's not the youth, it's the values that they have. I want to give an example. Dedan Kimathi, he died at 36 years old. Was he not a youth worthy of service, of recognition? Because he died at 36. That means he started fighting before he was 36. He was an actual youth when he started fighting. So the youth can not only do great things, but they can fight for this country. So when Uhuru says that that the youth are stealing, that he has to hire older people, what would he say of Dedan Kimathi if Dedan Kimathi was alive this time, right? Because you're somebody who fought, and he's a hero today, and he was a youth when he was fighting. So you're telling me that Uhuru cannot find heroes? He cannot find youth who can put the country ahead of themselves? It's a lie. I wanted to give another example. Alexander the Great, he died at 32. Alexander the Great, he moved all the way from Macedonia, right? It's visualize Italy, now the northern part of Italy, right? I think that's why it's around, or Greece, just visualize north of Greece. He moved from there, he went and conquered Persia. Persia is difficult to conquer because of its depth. It's too wide. You cannot. The Romans, they could win wars against, that time it was called Parthia, but they could not control it because it was too big. The depth of it was too large, right? Again, everybody who tried, Alexander went and conquered Afghanistan. The Russians could not conquer Afghanistan, right? Even when the odds were so great, right? And Alexander did this. I think he became king at around 22. And he did all of this in 10 years. He died at the age of 32. He died undefeated. He moved all the way from Greece all the way to, I think, was it India? He actually conquered part of India. Because I think, yeah, he conquered part of India. He remained undefeated. He wanted to pursue further, but his soldiers told him, hey, we need to go back. We need to go back. And I think I'll touch on Alexander some other time, because the phalanx formations, the companions, he was just a great fellow, and he was young. He started at 22. He died at 32. So this excuse that the youth cannot do something, it's an African excuse. This excuse that we're too young and that's why you're underdeveloped, it's an African excuse, right? And that's why we are underdeveloping, because we're developing excuses. We're moving into the wrong direction. Those excuses give us cover to move into the wrong direction, and we need to move in the right direction, right? So I think that was my analysis for today. I hope I haven't gone for long. I'll see you guys tomorrow at 5 p.m. Take care. God bless. Have a lovely evening. Bye bye.